The next stage in teaching reading is actually two parts. The first is linking letters to sounds. As I mentioned, English is alphabetic. We have 26 letters, and the letters or letter combinations represent 45 different sounds in English. And if you're coming from a foreign language, one of the things that you're going to have to do is learn English sounds, because they may be different than sounds in your own language. Now, there's many theories today that tell us how to teach this linking of letters to the sounds. And unfortunately, there's a lot of erroneous methods that are out there. So tip number 4 is to avoid teaching the linking of letters to sound in this way. And I'm going to give you several of them. The first is teaching letters by their names. Dr. Hilda Moss, in her book, You Can Prevent or Correct Learning Disorders, says, knowing the names of letters does not help the child with learning to read English, because the names of all consonants differ from their sounds, and the names of all vowels indicate only one of their sounds, which I want to add are not their most frequent sounds. Learning the names of letters first, before learning their sounds, confuses children. It is therefore better to teach their sounds first. The child can learn the letter names later. So what I'm saying is the first thing we want to train the brain to do when the child sees a letter is to instantly know the sounds that are available for that letter. Which leads me to the second one that we want to avoid, and that's only teaching one sound. Very, very common. A says ah, and that's all we give the child. The problem with that is now when we want to practice reading, we have to control and limit the vocabulary of any book we give them. English doesn't work like that, okay? Also, when we're only giving them one letter now, and then sound, and then next year we introduce another sound that this letter can say, and maybe a year or two later we introduce another sound that this letter can say, we do not, in the brain, link all of that information together for instant retrieval and reading. It creates an unclear picture for the child of how our language works. You told me, Mom, that A says ah. So the word is apron, right? You're wearing an apron to cook dinner? No, I'm wearing an apron. Well, why are you saying A when you told me A says ah? It's apron. No, honey, in this word, it's apron. We have just set up an exception. And the child is confused. The child doesn't understand. And if we don't fill in the gaps, which we typically don't when we teach this way, the child will fill in the gaps. And unfortunately, the child doesn't know how to put it all together correctly. Now, one of the erroneous ideas when I talk about actually introducing all of the sounds of the phonograms at once, we don't want to overwhelm the child. That's just too much. Have you ever seen the children and how fast they learn? Children absolutely learn the sounds of the phonograms at once and very quickly. In fact, when parents start working with their children, the children very quickly learn them faster than the parents. They learn them. All right, another erroneous method that is used is to teach the linking of the letters with sounds using pictures or stories, music, or other gimmicks. Our goal in teaching reading is for the child to have an instant recall of the sounds associated with the symbol. Instant recall. And when we start bringing in stories and we start bringing in other little picture cues and things like that, what's happening in the brain is the brain is sidetracked from instant association. Okay? When we teach using the music center of the brain, the information is stored in the music part of the brain. That means the child has to go to the music part of the brain to retrieve that information. That's not helpful for learning to read. So, when you're teaching basic facts, like the sounds of the alphabet, basic math facts that we want to happen instantly, we do not use music. We can use that for all kinds of other fun things that don't need instant recall. I remember with fondness working with my kids on learning geography, 2 songs. However, to this day, to access that information, I have to sing the song. All right, through the visual modality alone. We want to avoid that. 1/3 of the population, and I'm not talking about learning disabled children, I'm talking about regular everyday children, including high intelligence children. They will find it nearly impossible to learn from the visual modality alone. And unfortunately, that is how most programs will tell you how to teach. You have the book in front of you and nothing else. Let's work from the book. And that's a visual modality alone. Instead, when we teach reading, we want to engage all of the avenues to the brain. We want the child hearing the words, saying the words, writing the words, and then seeing the words. We actually want to reserve seeing for last so that we bring in all of the modalities. We can teach to all children this way. We also want to ensure stronger neural connections. I don't have a picture with me right now, but it shows some pictures of neurons and the difference between a brain that's trained using just regular visual teaching methods and one that's been trained using multisensory. And it's like, you know, a simple country road versus a complex freeway system. I mean, it's just everything is connected. And that's what we want, multiple avenues to the brain. So in review, we want to avoid teaching by the letter names, with only one sound, with gimmicks and music, and through the visual modality alone. So if we're avoiding all of that, how do we actually teach? Well, we're going to teach the sound system relationship in 2 different contexts. The first is penmanship. In the process of learning the motor skills that are involved with writing, he's also learning the sounds that represent what he's writing. So teaching these together involves multiple senses, multisensory learning at its best, and it produces stronger and more efficient neural connections. Learning to write the letters by the sounds is the beginning of what we call the encoding process. That's the beginning of expressive written language. Learning how to write the sounds, the letters, by sound is the beginning of them learning how to put the language into the written code. The goal of teaching penmanship is fluent, legible handwriting. And when the child can do that, then it frees his mind to now be able to focus on the ideas that he wants to convey, not where do I begin the next letter and where do I go and that kind of thing. So we want to have the penmanship become an automatic process. Problems with decoding processes can often be related back to penmanship instruction. So if a child had a problem learning how to write his language, that way that he learned can actually influence the way the letter and the sound relationship is imprinted in the brain. So decoding processes can sometimes be associated with penmanship instruction. The current method out there is to teach manuscript from the beginning, and then around 2nd, 3rd grade, we transition possibly to cursive. Don't listen to the educational gurus out there because they're trying to eliminate cursive altogether. However, when we teach from the beginning with cursive, which is, by the way, the historical method for teaching penmanship, then it can help prevent these reversals and other writing problems that torment dyslexic students. So teaching cursive writing from the beginning, along with the common sounds of phonograms, lays a solid foundation for linking letters to their sounds. I said we're teaching it in 2 contexts. The first was penmanship. The second is daily and rapid reading of the phonogram sounds. The student sees the letter, yes, that's visual, and practices reading those sounds rapidly. You can do this through flashcard drill, games, or other fun activities, so that eventually the child has the rapid recall of those available sounds. The brain, when you're reading, is working at lightning speed. And so their recall has to be at lightning speeds. Obviously, it can't be faster than I can flip a card, though, okay? All right, learning to read by the letters by their sounds is the beginning of the decoding process, or what we would call receptive language. So it's the beginning of receptive written language. Does that make sense? So we're just on the letters, and we've already begun expressive language and receptive language. One of the things we want to do is not hover on teaching this letter sound symbol for very long. The Council for Basic Education insists that phonics instruction has to be first and fast. You're going to bore the kids if you park on letters all year. Okay, they're just going to lose interest. Also, they need to see letters in the context of words and sentences for mastery of this information to come. So we don't wait for mastery before we move into putting it all together at the word level. So the second stage of the decoding is what we call the alphabetic principle. Reading research repeatedly proves that children need to be taught directly and explicitly through phonics. According to Dr. Sally Shaywitz of the Yale University Center for Learning and Attention, she said, years of educational research has shown that the use of intensive phonics is the only way to teach dyslexic and learning disabled individuals how to read. The new brain research shows why intensive phonics is also the best way for everyone to learn to read. So there's some problems with the phonics programs that are out there. For years, the reading academia has swung back and forth between, let's teach phonics, no, let's try whole language, or the look-say, or the sight word method. No, let's go back to phonics because that wasn't working. Oh, I don't like that, I want it. And what happens after all this swaying back and forth is we're ended up with rules that don't work, it's a mishmash, and the children are the ones who are suffering. Another problem is the teachers are not properly trained. We have teachers coming out of universities all the time that have not been given proper instruction on how to teach phonics. I was one, graduate level training. It was a course for people getting their reading credentials for teaching reading as a specialist. I did not learn how to teach reading. I learned theory, but that was it. The result has been weak substitutes and rules, and I'm going to come back to that one. So tip number 6 is to teach phonics and spelling together. Phonics and spelling are actually two sides of the same coin. Phonics teaches us how to decode what someone else has put into the code. Spelling teaches us how to put words we want to communicate into the code. We need to teach them together. Dr. Hilda Moss said, contrary to the prevailing educational theory, reading and writing belong together. They reinforce one another. For children to understand that this magical thing that letters represent sounds, the code has to be presented as reversible. It can go either way. So during the spelling, we're going to analyze why the words are built the way they are. And then reading, we're going to learn how to blend that word back together and decode it. Dr. Diane McGinnis, in her book, Why Our Children Can't Read and What We Can Do About It, she said, from research in the classroom and the clinic, we have discovered that when the sequence of reading and spelling instruction is compatible with the logic of the alphabet code and with the child's linguistic and logical development, learning to read and spell proceeds rapidly and smoothly for all children and is equally effective for poor readers of all ages. So we want to teach direct and explicit phonics with spelling from the beginning. Now, an effective phonics and spelling program is going to give you phonograms. I've been using this word. What is a phonogram? It's a letter or letter combinations that represent the sounds of the language. So here's some examples. In the first one I have D, Sh, E. Each one of those, it has one sound that's being represented by the phonogram. You can see there's multiple letters in some of them, but one sound. A, ah. Notice there's 3 sounds. Ch, k, sh. That is one that in some programs, the instruction for those 3 sounds is dragged out over 3 years. Ch, as in charity, k, as in Christina, sh, as in Cheryl. Th, as in think, th, as in those. So those letters represent multiple sounds. A good program is also going to give you reliable rules. They're going to explain the way that the phonograms interact with one another. This is the alphabetic principle. How does the alphabet work as a system? English is actually far more reliable than it's given credit for. The problem is with the way that it's presented, not with the language. So tip number 7, let's avoid the following kinds of methods of phonics instruction. Number 1, phony phonics. This is where you're not really teaching phonics at all. So this is actually out of a reading book. Here we go, we're going to teach phonics. This is elephant. Let's say that. Elephant. Great. Okay, now you've learned some phonics. Did I in any way relate the letters to the sounds that represent them? That's phony phonics. But that was in a How to Teach Reading, and that qualified as the phonics lesson for the day. That's phony phonics. Then we have pokey phonics. Phonics instruction should be first and fast. We want to give the tools of the language up front so the child can store it for instant retrieval later, and so they're not making up faulty assumptions about a language because we haven't given them the information. Key information needs to be stored together. So when we introduce A says ah, as in cat. Now, first of all, I use letter name, right? I'll teach that, but right away, I want the instant retrieval to be sounds only. I don't say A says ah. Did you get that? Because they only need to know about the ah. But wait a minute, is that all they need to know? What about apron, where it says A, and father, where it says ah? Okay, if I teach ah, a, ah, they are now ready for cat, apron, and father. I have not misled the child. We also want to avoid fickle phonics. Now there's a couple different things that I'm going to put under this category. And the first is bogus rules. Have you all heard the rule when two vowels go walking? Finish it for me. The first one does the talking. Great rule. Not. Only works 27% of the time. Would you like your stoplights to have that level of accuracy? Okay, here's an example of a phonogram that according to that rule should always say E. First letter says the talking, right? It does in the word bead. In the word bead, it says E. How about the word lead? It says eh. The word steak, it says A. The word learn, it says In the word bureau, a French word, it says O. So the first one does the talking. I've set the child up to have a misunderstanding of the code. If I teach phonograms and basic rules, this is not an issue. A cluttered code. Okay, when we're teaching a complicated subject, teaching a language that has over 1 million words might qualify it as a complicated subject, right? When we're teaching a complicated subject, we want to reduce it down to its core components. With the phonograms and the rules, we can unlock a language, English, that has over 1 million words. 70 basic phonograms, and in our program we teach 28 reliable rules. Okay? Now, when you add things like blends and other kinds of occasional spelling patterns, you add to those core components a cluttering of the basics that are not basic. Let me give you an example. I have the phonogram f, the PH together. There's nothing about P or H that makes the f sound. So without being taught that that's a unit that says f, the child would not know that. However, b-ol, the blend, bowl, as in blue, blanket, each of those can be sounded out. I don't need to bring that to a level of instant recall the way I do need with f. So if I add blends and other kinds of miscellaneous spelling patterns, I had a woman just this week email me, couldn't I add this? And well, what about this? And she's picking isolated instances of where letters or combinations are saying something. It's like, let's not clutter the code. We'll teach that spelling pattern, but we want to keep the code simple and consistent. Because as soon as you start giving me a letter combination, will it hold up to the actual language? If not, it's not a good rule. Okay? So we want to keep our code uncluttered. Another thing we want to avoid is the backward focus. When you're reading English, the eye has to be trained to track from left to right. There is nothing in the brain that tells you left to right is the right way to do it. And you know, some kids have a problem with that, don't they? Okay? In fact, if you were learning Japanese, you would learn from top to bottom. If you were learning Hebrew, you would learn to read from right to left. English, however, left to right. So we need to train that kind of eye tracking behavior. When we teach rhyming words, words that look alike, as a way of trying to develop vocabulary and decoding skills, We're setting the children up to track backwards. Here's an example. Here's some words. They look alike. I have the words day, may, and pay. They look alike. They all end with the same two-letter combination. They all say A. What does the child's eye do in reading them? When you show them that, they see the A, they go back to the beginning of the word to fill in the consonant, and they say the word. What's the eye tracking doing? It is backwards. It's right to left rather than left to right. It also sets the child up to think that when words look alike, they're going to sound alike. That does not hold up to the language. How about the word gas? It looks like has, and it looks like was, but they don't sound alike. Okay? So if I teach sound alike, or look alike must sound alike, I have set the child up to have an erroneous idea of how the language works. However, the words gas, has, and was can be explained with simple spelling rules and phonograms.